The South China Sea had been a powder keg for years, but in the summer of 2030, the world finally saw the spark that set it ablaze. For months, tensions had been building between China and the United States over territorial disputes, freedom of navigation, and the military buildup of artificial islands. Both sides had issued warnings, staged exercises, and shadowed each other's fleets across the contested waters. Diplomats talked of peace, but the rumble of warships and the roar of jet engines told a different story. By July, the South China Sea bristled with the steel of modern war. The Chinese Navy, emboldened by years of expansion, sailed in force. Their formation was massive. Destroyers with advanced missile systems, submarines lurking beneath the waves, and the pride of their fleet, the aircraft carrier Shandong, flanked by frigates and fast attack craft. Overhead, J-20 stealth fighters patrolled the skies, casting long shadows across the waves as they soared above their ships like sentinels of an empire on the rise. To Beijing, this was a show of dominance, a final push to cement control over the sea lanes they claimed as their own. The U.S. Navy, however, was ready. The Seventh Fleet, spearheaded by the USS Ronald Reagan and reinforced by a strike group from Guam, sailed head-on to meet the challenge. American carrier decks were alive with motion, F-35 Lightning II jets armed and fueled, crews scrambling across steel decks slick with sea spray. A Virginia-class submarine slid silently beneath the surface, its crew tense, fingers hovering over firing controls. The sea was crowded, restless, and tense, every ship's radar locked on the enemy, every commander waiting for the order they all knew would come. It began just before dawn. The first missiles streaked across the sky like falling stars, their smoke trails cutting across the rising sun. Chinese destroyers launched the opening salvo, hoping to overwhelm the American ships with sheer volume. The U.S. response was immediate and precise. Aegis missile defense systems flared to life, intercepting incoming warheads midair with blinding flashes. The horizon turned into a wall of fire as defensive bursts lit up the sky. For minutes that felt like hours, the battle was fought in arcs of smoke and thunder. Then came the counterstrike. From hundreds of miles away, U.S. submarines and cruisers unleashed a barrage of Tomahawk missiles. The sea hissed with their passage as they skimmed low across the waves, invisible until the moment of impact. Explosions rocked the Chinese fleet as two destroyers went up in flames, their decks split apart in fireballs that lit the water around them. The air filled with the sound of secondary detonations as fuel tanks and ammunition stores ignited. The Chinese response was furious. More missiles cut through the air, more fighters scrambled to intercept. Dogfights erupted above the battle group, with American F-35s using stealth and superior radar systems to outmaneuver their adversaries. Chinese pilots fought bravely, but their aircraft were falling faster than reinforcements could arrive. The skies belonged to the Americans. On the surface, the sea boiled with fire. The USS Chancellorsville, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, took a glancing hit, flames licking across its hull before damage control crews beat back the inferno. On the other side, the Chinese carrier Shandong launched wave after wave of strike fighters in desperation. Its flight deck roared with activity until, at last, the U.S. counterstrike reached it. A pair of F-35s, flying low and fast, penetrated its defenses and loosed their payload. The deck erupted in a plume of fire and steel, the mighty carrier shuddering as explosions tore through its hangars. But the decisive blow came. From beneath, a U.S. Virginia-class submarine, having stalked its prey for hours, fired a spread of heavyweight torpedoes. They raced silently through the deep before slamming into the side of the Shandong. The explosion was devastating. Metal twisted, compartments flooded, and the carrier began to list. Within minutes, flames climbed its superstructure, and smoke billowed high into the sky, visible for miles. Panic swept through the fleet as China's flagship burned. Sailors abandoned ship as the pride of their navy was swallowed by the sea. By now the battle had tipped irreversibly. American destroyers pressed forward, launching salvos that crippled enemy frigates. Submarines prowled like sharks, taking down ship after ship with ruthless efficiency. Overhead, U.S. carrier-based aircraft continued their relentless assault, hammering at radar stations, missile batteries, and what remained of the Chinese fleet's defensive umbrella. Every strike was coordinated, every move a step ahead of the enemy's reaction. It was a demonstration not only of superior firepower but of doctrine, training, and technology honed through decades of preparation. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity. By nightfall, the once proud Chinese armada was reduced to smoldering wreckage. Flames still burned on the surface of the sea, casting eerie reflections across the waves. Broken ships listed helplessly, some half-sunk, others reduced to floating hulks. Survivors clung to debris, waiting for rescue in the dark waters. The thunder of war gave way to silence, broken only by the distant roar of aircraft still patrolling overhead. The U.S. Navy had not merely repelled the Chinese fleet, it had shattered it completely. Word of the battle spread quickly. In Washington, military leaders received the reports with grim satisfaction. The South China Sea had been secured, at least for the moment. In Beijing, the news hit like a hammer. Entire fleets lost, a carrier sunk, thousands of sailors dead or captured. It was a humiliation unlike anything China had faced in modern history, a brutal demonstration that their naval power, though vast, was not invincible. The world watched in shock. For years, analysts had warned of a potential clash between the two superpowers, but few had expected the conflict to erupt so violently, or for the U.S. to emerge with such a decisive victory. Yet the price of that victory was heavy. Even as the wreckage burned, commanders knew this was not the end. For every ship sunk, for every fighter lost, there would be consequences, political, strategic, and perhaps even more deadly than the battle itself. The South China Sea lay quiet now, littered with steel corpses and drifting smoke. The ocean had witnessed a clash of titans, a fiery storm of missiles, torpedoes, and jet fighters that had rewritten the balance of power in the Pacific. But as the waves closed over the wreckage, those who had fought knew the war was far from over. This was only the beginning, and the real storm was still to come. The victory in the South China Sea was hailed as one of the most decisive naval triumphs in modern history. Across the United States, news broadcasts replayed footage of burning Chinese warships and praised the courage of American sailors and pilots. Celebrations erupted in Washington, Tokyo, and Manila, where allies saw the battle as proof that China's expansionist ambitions could be checked. Yet beneath the cheers, a sense of unease stirred. The clash had been violent, humiliating for Beijing, and so total in its destruction that many wondered how China's leadership would respond. Few imagined that the war at sea had merely opened the door to a new and far more dangerous kind of conflict. In Beijing, the mood was starkly different. The loss of the Shandong and half of the People's Liberation Army Navy's most advanced vessels was a devastating blow not only militarily but symbolically. The Politburo met in emergency session as reports of the defeat poured in. The generals who had once promised victory now stood silent before an enraged leadership. The humiliation was unbearable. Retreat was impossible. Retaliation was inevitable. But China's commanders knew a direct rematch at sea would be suicide. The United States had shown overwhelming superiority in technology, coordination, and firepower. So the decision was made to fight on another front, one where missiles and aircraft mattered less and cunning mattered more. The first signs came quietly. Banks in New York and Los Angeles reported strange irregularities in their systems, transactions delayed, networks flooded with mysterious traffic. At first, officials dismissed it as routine cybercrime. Within days, the truth became clear. Massive cyberattacks were underway, targeting financial institutions, power grids, communication networks, and even military satellites. Screens went black across trading floors as stock exchanges froze. Airports halted flights when navigation systems went offline. Hospitals found their equipment disrupted, surgeries postponed as critical machines failed without warning. The American public, fresh from celebrating victory at sea, found themselves plunged into chaos. Phones failed, ATMs stopped working, power flickered in cities from Chicago to Dallas. Panic spread through neighborhoods as grocery stores ran out of supplies and credit card systems refused transactions. The internet was flooded with disinformation, some of it so convincing that even seasoned officials struggled to separate truth from lies. China had turned the invisible battlefield of cyberspace into its new warfront, and the United States was caught off guard. Military leaders scrambled to respond. The Pentagon's Cyber Command moved into crisis mode, attempting to isolate infected systems and trace the source of the attacks. But Beijing had prepared well. Sleeper code embedded years earlier now activated, striking deep inside U.S. networks. It was not just China at work either. Within a week, Russia issued a statement condemning American aggression and declaring solidarity with its strategic partners. Soon after, Iranian officials joined the chorus, followed by North Korea's defiant announcement that it too would stand against Western imperialism. What emerged was more than a loose coalition. It was a formal pact, a new axis stretching from Moscow to Tehran to Pyongyang, bound together with Beijing at its core. The news stunned the world. In capitals across Europe, NATO leaders scrambled to reassess their strategies. Some pushed for full support of the United States, while others hesitated, wary of being dragged into a global war. In the Middle East, oil markets trembled as Iran threatened to cut off supply routes. North Korea began firing missiles into the sea in a show of defiance, rattling South Korea and Japan. The battle in the South China Sea had ignited a chain reaction, and now the conflict was no longer regional, it was global. In Washington, the president addressed the nation from the Oval Office. His words were resolute, promising that America would not bow to cyberterrorism or intimidation. Yet behind the confident tone, advisors whispered of vulnerabilities. For decades, the U.S. had relied on digital systems for everything from finance to defense, and now those systems were under siege. Aircraft carriers could win battles at sea, but what good were they if satellite communications went dark or missile defense radars were blinded by malware? The enemy had found a way to strike at the heart of American power without firing a shot. The impact was felt in ordinary lives. Families in suburban homes found themselves cut off from the internet and electricity for days at a time. Grocery shelves emptied, not because of shortages, but because supply chains broke down when shipping companies lost digital access. In cities, traffic lights failed, causing gridlock and chaos. Panic buying swept across communities, and rumors spread faster than the government could counter them. Trust in institutions faltered, and protests erupted demanding answers. America had won the battle in the South China Sea, but now it was struggling to keep its own house in order. Meanwhile, in Beijing, the propaganda machine roared to life. State media portrayed the cyber offensive as a righteous counterstrike, a way to level the playing field against a superpower that had humiliated them at sea. Citizens rallied, believing their nation was standing up against Western aggression. Russia broadcast similar messages, claiming the new alliance was defending sovereignty against an overreaching America. Across the world, nations not aligned with either side were forced to choose: side with the West and risk retaliation, or hedge with the new coalition and gamble on its strength. The United States struck back in cyberspace. Teams of elite hackers infiltrated Chinese and Russian systems, disrupting state-run industries, shutting down propaganda networks, and causing blackouts in major cities. Yet each strike was answered in kind, escalating the invisible war. Satellites in orbit flickered offline. Surveillance drones crashed mid-flight. Naval vessels at sea reported sudden malfunctions in their radar systems. The battlefield had shifted from open waters to a shadow war of code and electricity, where victories were harder to see but just as devastating. And while governments waged their cyber campaigns, intelligence agencies uncovered an even darker development. The new alliance was not content with digital warfare alone. Reports indicated that Russia was preparing to deploy advanced hypersonic missiles to the Pacific, while Iran threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz. North Korea, emboldened by its new allies, accelerated its nuclear program, boasting that it now had the backing to deter any American response. The world was sliding toward a confrontation far larger than a naval clash. In secret rooms beneath the Pentagon, strategists pored over maps and data, weighing options. The choice was grim: escalate, and risk igniting a global war that could engulf entire continents. Hold back, and watch America's allies lose faith in its strength. The South China Sea had been a clear battlefield, with ships and planes locked in combat. This new war was murkier, harder to define, and more dangerous because of it. As days turned into weeks, the initial glow of victory at sea faded into a somber reality. The United States had crushed China's fleet, but in doing so it had triggered a chain of events that unleashed chaos across the globe. The battlefield was no longer confined to waters or skies. It was everywhere, inside the wires of a hospital's equipment, in the blackout of a city's grid, in the flicker of a satellite orbiting high above. The future of the conflict was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the storm was only just beginning.